cultfiggatv. Revolutionary salute. Revolutionary salute. Like, share, subscribe. Welcome to the House of Revolution. You know I'm your humble host, the Yao Mean of Revolution, and World War III has started. NATO pretending to be Ukraine attacks Russia. Before we get into that, be sure to wipe your feet. That means hit the like button. You in the House of Revolution. Like, share, subscribe, support the platform, y'all. Well, they done it. They playing with our lives. I'm hearing Putin is in military meeting with his military officials right now, preparing to deal with NATO, and it might mean preparing to deal with the U.S. itself.
The game that Putin's been playing is about to change. He's going to be hit and hit hard by the United States.
These people will not give up. These sick, twisted people will not give up, trying to push us into a nuclear war with Russia. It's almost like they live in a bubble completely devoid of any kind of reason or logic. Like if you and I were talking to them, we would be shocked and appalled at how they think and act. Right now, we are entering the most dangerous moment of this war right now. And we have some huge new developments over the past 24 and 48 hours. So we're going to get to all of these updates here in a moment. But first, let's talk about what's happening right now with Russia. Overnight, Russia's 44th Army Corps pounded Ukrainian positions with a coordinated and a devastating barrage of drone and artillery strikes. Entire units were driven back from their positions near the Russian border. And overnight, what's being called the largest single-day attack on Russia since the start of the war, Ukraine, along with NATO intelligence, launched a massive drone operation using AI to target and pinpoint Russia's nuclear bomber fleet. Yes, a direct hit on Russia's nuclear fleet. And reports suggest Putin has launched a nuclear doomsday bomber. I mean, are these people insane? They're attacking the largest nuclear power in the world. And yes, NATO did all the coordination and, according to reports, 18 months of planning to pull this off.
That is some news emerging that the Ukrainians think that they have inflicted some significant damage on Russian bombers.
Ukrainians, meanwhile, fed up with Zelensky's conscription goons over the past 48 hours, they're fighting back. These guys tried to throw another young man into the meat grinder, but Ukrainians have had enough. They attacked the goons, slashed their tires. We saw these videos before where group of moms came together and started beating the crap out of these Ukrainian conscription goons. And we learned this week, that those goons are getting between $100 and $500 per civilian that they round up and throw into their truck in order to die in this war. So their life is worth at most $500 US. It's disgusting. And in a move that sends a clear message about the consequences of provoking Moscow, Russia also targeted major food and grain facilities overnight, crippling Ukraine's already fragile export infrastructure. Meanwhile, instead of pursuing peace, Ukraine is doubling down on escalation by targeting civilians. Yes, killing civilians. Just look at this report from Ryelsk, where Ukrainian forces launched strikes that hit residential homes, civilians being caught in the crossfire every day. Why? Because Washington won't stop pouring gasoline on this fire. And then last night, multiple agencies say a bomb went off, striking a civilian train in Russia, killing at least 7 as of this recording. 7 civilians, injuring 28 people. Eyewitnesses say an explosion went off, bringing down the train as it was about to pass. I don't believe in coincidences. The moment this train is moving overhead, boom, this explosion goes off. Multiple agencies say this was sabotage, clearly. And as this whole thing escalates right now, guess who's missing in action? President Donald Trump. Not because he's unwilling. He wanted to be the peace president. I'm not sure exactly what happened, but because his own advisors and so-called allies aren't telling him what's really happening. A reporter asked Trump this week about Russia's retaliation for Ukraine's recent failed assassination attempt on Vladimir Putin. The reporter referenced the failed strike on Putin's helicopter, an attempted decapitation of a world leader, arguably probably the most powerful man in the world. Trump looked confused, like he had no idea what they were talking about.
Can I follow up on that. A Russian commander reportedly said that Putin was almost caught in the middle of a drone attack from Ukraine. So do you have any...
I haven't heard that, but maybe that would be a reason. I don't know, but I have not heard that.
And even after that incident, he was asked about it again and still didn't seem to know what was going on.
I have gotten to see things that I was very surprised at. Rockets being shot into cities like Kiev during a negotiation that I felt was maybe very close to ending. We were going to solve a problem, and then all of a sudden rockets got shot into a couple of cities and people died. I saw things that I was surprised at. And I don't like being surprised.
This is all so strange. So the question is, which neocons are hiding vital information from President Trump? Why is the president being kept in the dark as Europe teeters on the edge of nuclear catastrophe?
The United States and NATO, we do not care how many Ukrainians die, not civilians, not women, not children, not soldiers. We do not care. I don't think Ukraine has anything to do with the decision about peace or war. I think the decision about peace or war is made in Washington, D.C.
And why did NATO target Putin last week? As we reported on Redacted, Ukraine can't hit the broadside of a barn without NATO targeting and telemetry. NATO tried to assassinate Putin last week, plain and simple. Why did they do that? Remember, Ukraine admitted that when Trump shut down all of their intelligence gathering and targeting, they couldn't do anything. They were sitting ducks. So they couldn't have hit Putin without NATO's help. So the answer might lie with swamp creatures like Senator Lindsey Graham, who just gave up the charade. Graham says, quote, "Enough is enough. Peace talks have failed. It's time to act." He's pushing his anti-Russian sanctions bill next week and says Putin's going to be hit hard by the United States.
The game that Putin's been playing is about to change. He's going to be hit and hit hard by the United States when it comes to sanctions.
And these sanctions will cripple his economy. They will be bone-crushing to a nation that is basically, as one of our colleagues once said, a gas station with nuclear arms.
This bill is a ticking economic time bomb, not for Russia, but for us. Remember, we've already levied incredible amounts of sanctions on Russia. And what has it done? It's brought them closer to China. It's expanded the BRICS nations by a landslide. The dumping of U.S. currency, the driving of the U.S. dollar right into the toilet. That's what it's done. Widespread inflation all across the United States. Hello, do you remember the last 4 years? So get this, Lindsey Graham wants to impose wide-ranging sanctions in response to the Afghanistan withdrawal. Yeah, you heard that right. A bill that was supposed to punish the Pentagon for abandoning Americans is now being repurposed to launch economic warfare on Russia. Why? Because the military-industrial complex needs this enemy now that we're not in Afghanistan anymore. And Russia, of course, fits the bill perfectly. But the joke's on us. Just look at the U.S. dollar. Over the past 48 hours, the dollar plunged to its lowest levels in 3 years. These reckless sanctions are backfiring. Instead of collapsing Russia's economy, they're wrecking our own. And Putin? He's sitting back watching NATO collapse under the weight of its own arrogance. Even Germany's own finance minister, Christian Lindner, had started telling the truth. He says a defeat of Russia is impossible. Let that sink in. A top NATO official from one of NATO's most powerful economies just admitted that this war is unwinnable. And yet we're still shipping weapons, draining our economy, letting neocons like Lindsey Graham, Victoria Nuland still call the shots. They're running the show. And they want war. And they will do everything they can to prevent President Trump from pushing for peace. These are the same people who launched a coup in Ukraine in 2014, who spent years lying to the American people about Russia, who censored dissent during COVID. And now they're dragging us into the most dangerous conflict of our lifetime. Heck, China on Friday called it out, saying the United States is solely responsible for the war in Ukraine. Here's China.
The United States bears a major responsibility for the outbreak of the war and the continuation of the war.
And where's NATO in all of this? Of course, egging it on, attacking Putin's helicopter trip last week, trying to assassinate him. Where's the EU? Talking about troop deployments. Britain, they're sending long-range missiles right now. The West is running out of a runway right now. And we're being lied to by a media that treats war like it's a Marvel movie. It's so fun. Millions of people die. It's fun for their ratings. So here's the truth. This isn't about stopping Russia. This is about laundering money. It's about hiding corruption and controlling power. And they're willing to burn the world down in order to keep their grip on it. Lindsey Graham makes a shit ton of money from defense contractors. Trump better get his act together real fast. Fire these neocons running his administration. That's my point.
It's too late.
So that's the news update.
Targeting civilians on a civilian train is an act of terrorism, and the Ukrainian regime know that, and moreover, their NATO masters know it. That means the governments in London, in Paris, in Berlin, and in Washington know that these acts are acts of terrorism. They are war crimes. They are crimes against humanity. The bombing of the nuclear strategic bombing Tu airplanes in the 5 targeted Russian air bases is not in itself terrorism. Until you look at the way in which these drones were delivered, there's a suspicion that some of them were launched from Finland and Norway, which, if true, will be of enormous magnitude. But most of them were launched from log cabins or the back of trucks that had been driven by people wearing civilian clothes across Russia in order to place them close to these strategic nuclear facilities. Now, wearing civilian clothes to commit acts of war is, of course, a war crime. It renders the belligerent stripped of the protections of the Geneva Convention. They can be executed if they are caught. But there's no doubt that it has provided a very useful war propaganda, armed war propaganda for the Ukrainian side, and their paid cohorts of NAFO fools and fellas are, of course, celebrating on social media. I thought I had gotten rid of all of them, but I just had to block 20 or 30 more. But they'll be laughing on the other side of their face, or rather, the poor people of Ukraine, because the NAFO people are never in Ukraine. They don't even claim to be in Ukraine. They're just in the pay of those who are paying for the war in Ukraine. But the people in Ukraine are right now under incredible barrage of ballistic missiles, and maybe more to come. Maybe we'll get another viewing of the terrifying power of the Oroshenk missile, against which no defense in the world is yet available. The response to what happened today, when 4 nuclear bombers were set on fire, presumed destroyed, definitely an insurance write-off, is good propaganda, but of course it will change nothing in the course of the war. Russia has thousands of bombers, and it has thousands and thousands of very powerful weapons, including, of course, 1,500 operational nuclear missiles. It has battlefield nuclear weapons. It has the Oroshenk, and it has in total more than 4,500 nuclear bombs. I'm making these points not out of any love of war pornography, for I have none. That is not an affliction I have ever had. I've been in too many war zones for that. But to make the next point that I want to express, if anybody destroyed 4 United States Air Force nuclear bombers, what do you think would be the result? What do you think the United States would do to any country, any belligerent that broke the nuclear threshold, broached the inner sanctum of the nuclear doctrine of the United States of America? You just have to ask yourself that question, and you already know the answer. And the Ukraine will be getting that answer right now and in hours and days to come. Of that, I have no doubt. But it undoubtedly will strengthen measurably those in the Kremlin who believe there's been far too much pussyfooting around in this war, and that it risks the loss of more life, not less, to wear kid gloves to avoid taking out the leadership of Ukraine and taking out the essential infrastructure of Ukraine. I just give you this example. On the day when 4 attacks were made on 4 separate railway bridges in Russia, there are 17 bridges across the river Dnipro. Russia has not destroyed a single one of them, though they could destroy all 17 of them right now in the next 60 minutes. That they have not done so is a testament to either the strategic patience of Vladimir Putin or the naivety of Vladimir Putin, always hoping that by minimizing the impact of the war on essential infrastructure used by civilians as well as military, that Russia could take the moral high ground, Russia could be the good guy in this conflict. But if you're bringing down railway bridges on passengers and crew, the entire crew of the train in Bryansk were all wiped out. Every railway worker on the train was wiped out by the terrorist attack on the bridge. The fact that the other side is now abandoning all caution, is now firing Storm Shadow missiles supplied by France this day into Donetsk, a part of Novorossiya, a part of Russia. French missiles fired into it today, killing and maiming civilian people. The fact that the other side is infiltrating people dressed as civilians, as terrorist belligerents, to fire drones at your nuclear task force is, of course, a spear at the heart of the Russian Federation. It is actually, I hate to use the word because it has real implications. It is an existential threat to the Russian Federation because the Russian Federation's nuclear doctrine says that it is. Any attack on our strategic forces will be opening the attacker up to a strategic response. Any country with nuclear weapons has that in their nuclear doctrine. Because once the parity of nuclear force is broken on one side, the opportunity for others to existentially destroy that nuclear power is obviously there. So the impact on the talks tomorrow in Istanbul, you don't need to be Einstein to work them out. Here's my best guess. It is only a guess. It might be that Putin's strategic patience will endure, although I doubt it. But it could happen. But I suspect that the Russian negotiators who are already in Istanbul will table a simple demand of the Ukrainian armed forces through their representative in the talks for the complete withdrawal of all Ukrainian forces from all of the territories of Novorossiya, the immediate creation of a buffer zone around Ukraine between the borders of Russia and Ukraine must now be created, and Ukrainian neutrality and denazification be immediately proceeded with, followed, I'm sure, by the demand for the departure of Zelensky and the crew who launched these attacks today. Of course, at that point, the Ukrainian delegation will withdraw and they will seek further and better help from their NATO allies. Unlikely to be the United States, but definitely London and Paris. In London, the defense minister, an inky-fingered clerk with no discernible knowledge or background or experience in defense policy at all, a man, I'll remind you, called John Healey, because you've never heard of him before. A man who wouldn't be appointed to run the quartermaster store at a minor army base. He's your war leader. Look at him. Take a good look at him. Who knows? He might be the last face that you ever look upon. John Healey gave a speech. I think that's what they called him. I should say, rather, he read out a piece of paper at the Russi Royal United Services Institute in London today, in which he declared that Britain was preparing for war against Russia. And moreover, that we were going to build six new arms factories. I wonder how long they would survive any outbreak of hostility. You see, it's my melancholy duty to remind my fellow countrymen that the entirety of the British Isles, its entirety, every square mile of it, can be reduced to ashes, cinders, with everything that was alive in it then dead, by one Russian hypersonic nuclear missile with 8 warheads, splitting up, spreading across the country and destroying everything in their path. 6 arms factories. I wonder where they got the money for that, given that they cannot afford to pay our disabled people the benefits that Keir Starmer formerly described as being morally repugnant to cut them. He's cutting them. The cold weather payments to our pensioners that Starmer regularly accused his predecessor of preparing to scrap, he scrapped them. We have no money, but we give billions to Ukraine. We have no money, but we build 6 new arms factories. This madness of the British government is taking us all the way to Armageddon. Now, I know that Keir Starmer feels deeply about Ukraine. I'm probing it all the time. I'm probing his close relations with Ukraine and with Ukrainians all the time. But this is a backdoor way of taking us into Armageddon. Britain has made itself the #1 enemy of the Russian Federation. There are many people in Moscow. I have no knowledge of it, but there are many people in Moscow who believe that the British state was involved in this terrorism in Ukraine today. If a shooting war breaks out between Russia and NATO, I warn my fellow countrymen of this: Britain is the #1 target. If nothing else happens in that shooting war, there will be no British person left alive. There will be no 2 stones stood upon each other in any town or city in the United Kingdom. And then the radiation, which will roll out across the countryside, and then the nuclear winter under which everything that is alive will perish. These are the stakes that we are currently playing for. Now, I don't expect that Russia will respond to today's attacks with a nuclear weapon, though they would be fully entitled to under their own nuclear doctrine and under the obvious realpolitik that any nuclear armed country would follow. If somebody attacks your nuclear weapons, you must respond with nuclear weapons, or your nuclear parity with your adversaries is over. But I do expect that the response will be, as I said, swift and terrible. We'll hear from Che Bose in Moscow in just a minute or two about what the atmosphere is like there. But I want to have some time to discuss something that has been troubling me over these last few days. Believe me, I never wanted to climb into this rabbit hole. It seemed to me that the madness that took place at the Victory Parade in Liverpool was just that, madness. First, like everyone else, I feared that it was a terrorist attack. I feared that the driver would be revealed as Mohammed this or Abdul that. I feared that he'd have a black face or a brown face. I don't hide from you that I was relieved when the police indicated in an unusual, unprecedented statement that the person arrested at the scene was white, was British, and was local. But the more I've looked at it, the more I realize that something is not right, and that there are important questions that still have not been answered. There's a picture of the driver of the car at the wheel. There's another picture released by the authorities of what they claim to be the same man, except it quite plainly is not the same man. And the court artists in Britain, you're not allowed to take pictures in court, but an artist can make a drawing. And the drawing looked nothing like the actual driver of the car, or the man we've just shown you, or the man who was actually at the wheel. But that's not the end of these strange events. Is his name Paul Doyle? Is his name Jean-Paul Doyle? Is he a former Royal Marine, Special Forces, British soldier? Or is he a former BlackRock employee? Blackwater, I beg your pardon, the former mercenary giant. Was he with Blackwater? Was he with the Royal Marines? Was he with both? These are questions that deserve an answer, because if it's one or the other or both, that gives a profile to the alleged would-be assassin that is intriguing indeed. But even that is not the only strange thing. Who were the snipers on the roof in Liverpool above the parade? Why were they not wearing uniforms of any kind? Why were they not wearing police uniforms? Why were they not wearing British Army uniforms? Why were, and Warren Thornton, an acquaintance of the show, a former sniper in the army himself, makes the point very powerfully that you can't have two snipers and no spotter. You can't have one sniper and no spotter. A spotter with binoculars is an essential accompaniment to a sniper. It should be two snipers, two spotters. But there are only two people on the roof, and both of them are looking through the sights of weapons. Who were they? And why were they there? Is it normal in Britain for a football victory parade to be overlooked by armed snipers without uniforms? And lastly, why did Grok try to tell us that that picture we've just shown you was in fact not in Liverpool, but in London. And years old from the siege of the Iranian embassy. Do they think Liverpool people don't know what Liverpool looks like? Do they think London people don't know what Lancaster Gate looks like? And when it was pointed out that the River Mersey was clearly visible in the pictures, Grok said, that's not the River Mersey, that is the Serpentine Lake in Hyde Park in London. Is Grok stupid? Or does it think we are stupid? I want to know more about what happened in Liverpool and why all these discrepancies have been allowed to spread like wildfire through social media, completely undermining the police's presumed initial intention of not allowing this particular act of lunacy to be as corrosive and dangerous as previous acts of lunacy in England have recently been. Che Bose is up next. Stay tuned.
This is a coordinated attack on Russia to provoke Vladimir Putin into a response. I think if we look back over the last 3.5 years, this has been the trend, this has been the norm. Provoke, instigate, and then go on TV and cry about it. This is exactly what has used to happen, and I think this is what's happening again. Hello, my friends, I hope you're all doing well. Today is Sunday, the 1st of June, and this is my second video update for today. We have many stories to get through, but I think the standout is the large-scale drone attack which Ukraine has carried out inside Russia. The Ukrainian sources are reporting that over 40 Russian strategic bombers have actually been destroyed or damaged. As soon as I've seen this news, it made me wonder, is this a coincidence? Is the timing a coincidence? Because we finished the previous episode just a few hours ago with the incident in Bryansk, where last night, certain people, nobody knows who, have blown up 2 railway bridges in Russia, causing a civilian train to derail. Is all of this a coincidence? Because tomorrow we are supposed to have the second round of negotiations between Russia and Ukraine. And speaking of coincidences, before you make up your mind, the second story which I'm going to cover today is an article published by The Times, which puts the green t-shirt in a very bad light. Now, you know me very well. I'm not a big believer in coincidences, especially when these things happen the day before the second round of negotiations. My friends, let me put an end to the waffle because we have this and many other news that I want to cover. And let's just go to Ukrainska Pravda, the beacon of democracy, and let's begin with the incident in Russia. Ukraine launches large-scale drone attack on Russian airfields. 40 strategic bombers reportedly hit. A large number of Russian strategic bombers are reported to be ablaze following drone attacks on Russian airfields carried out by the Security Service of Ukraine, the SSU, on the 1st of June. The source shared a video in which the voice of the SSU Chief Lieutenant General Vasily Malyuk is heard commenting on a strike. This is what the Belaya airfield in Russia's Irkutsk Oblast looks like now, enemy strategic aircraft. A total of 40 aircraft are known to have been destroyed, A-50s, Tu-95s, and Tu-22 M3s. Now, on surface level, this looks to be like a good PR stunt from the green t-shirt. And it's also a small military victory, it has to be said, because the Ukrainians have managed to hit an important military target inside Russia. However, the problem the green t-shirt will have is that these sort of things are very short-lived, usually. And that's because no amount of that can change the outcome of the conflict. This reminds me, my friends, of what we have seen last August when the green t-shirt has decided to go into Kursk. It looked good for his supporters from the outside, but inside it has costed him a lot of manpower, ammunition, and equipment. It was a no-go from the very beginning, but it was a good PR stunt. and it held the headlines for a while. This is nowhere as big as that, but the point remains. You see, Ukraine has a manpower shortage problem. Russia, right now, their biggest problem seems to be their minus 40 aircraft, if those numbers are even remotely true. Which one is easier to replace, man or machine? Well, I go with machine. Machines are much easier to be replaced. But I think the reason for why we see this one day before Ukraine and Russia are supposed to negotiate is because the West is trying to provoke Russia into a response. Hopefully, that's what they hope, into a disproportionate response. Because then they get to push to the media, look what the Russians are doing. These are the tactics which they have used for the last 3.5 years. The tactics have remained the same. It's just the ways that they have adapted. That's about it. Now let's carry on. Our source said that this unique special operation has been named Pavutina, which means web. Early estimates suggest that the damage inflicted on Russian aircraft exceeds $2 billion. Just for context, $2 billion is the exact cost of 2 Patriot missile battery systems. In other words, this is not going to be the end of the world for Russia. I think the Russians have seen bigger losses historically speaking. This is why I will re-emphasize the point. It's far easier to replace machinery and equipment than it is to replace people. And eventually, this equation right here will decide who wins and who loses. Now let's move on. Kiev mayor accuses Zelensky of authoritarianism amid corruption scandal. The Times posted a comprehensive article about the most famous Ukrainian politicians in the international arena, noting that at the outset of the war, Zelensky, leveraging martial law, appointed a military administration in Kiev which overlaps with the mayor's authority. And this is a quote from Klitschko. This is a purge of democratic principles and institutions under the guise of war. I said once that it smells of authoritarianism in our country. Now it stinks. Should this come as a surprise to anybody? Well, probably not, because corruption in Ukraine was one of those things which was acknowledged worldwide even before this conflict started. However, after the conflict started, the European Union and Joe Biden would have us all believe that, you see, there's no room for corruption in Ukraine. Ukraine is the beacon of democracy, right? Well, not exactly. So Mr. Klitschko is probably right in his statements. However, that doesn't mean that he himself is a darling. Of course not. What this means is that there's different factions in Ukraine, and not just in Ukraine, but also in the West. There are people, and the European Union, who probably favor the green t-shirt, but others, who knows, maybe the United States is favoring Mr. Klitschko. You know, it was the same sort of thing with Mr. Zaluzhny, who was sent in exile to be Ukraine's ambassador to the United Kingdom. This is the circle that keeps on going. And again, I will stress this point. It's not a coincidence that we see these sort of things being published one day before the negotiation. Who knows? Maybe someone's trying to send a message to the green t-shirt. Look, don't derail this round of talks as well. But that's just my guess. Let's carry on. Kremlin launches digital ruble to control Russians, Ukraine's defense intelligence says. Defense intelligence of Ukraine has reported on another step by the criminal regime in Moscow aiming at strengthening total control over its own population. The introduction of a digital ruble. So they're saying that the introduction of the digital ruble would mean that Vladimir Putin will enslave his population. Well, I'm glad they've made that point, because that's exactly what I was about to say about the digital pound and about the digital dollar, and who knows about the digital euro, because that's definitely the direction we are heading towards. But you see, those ones are fine. When these Western leaders are presenting their digital vision for the future, it's all good. It's all sunshine and rainbows. Of course, we won't control you to the digital pound. Of course not. What makes you even think that? But the digital ruble, well, you have to be very skeptical of that, because it's Vladimir Putin who's behind it. Who knows? Maybe Putin will just speak from behind the digital ruble. This is the hypocrisy that people have to go through whenever they read these sort of media outlets or propaganda outlets. The EU expects that Russia will completely control the circulation of the virtual ruble. It will track every transaction, and the spending of digital rubles will be limited by the citizen's place of residence or the type of goods. Just when you thought that hypocrisy and lying couldn't get any higher, well, they prove you wrong. They're making it sound as if, look, the digital ruble is evil because it can control you in this way and that way. But what they have just described there are the traits of every single digital currency that we're about to have in the future. People have been talking about the same exact thing for years, about the potential digital dollar, the potential digital pound, and so on and so forth. But they make it sound as if, look, only the ruble. The rest of them are very good, especially if they come from the West. But the ruble, that's the bad kind. You need to stay away. Russia intensifies offensive on Zaporizhia front and puts pressure on Sumy Oblast, Ukraine's commander-in-chief says. The defense forces continue to hold back the enemy, inflicting significant losses on it. The enemy has focused its main efforts on the Pokrovsk-Toretsk, Liman, and Novopavlivka fronts and the areas bordering the Russian Federation in Sumy Oblast. It has become significantly more active on the Zaporizhia front, where it is conducting active offensive operations. Going back to the point I've made earlier about Ukraine not being able to change anything with its attack on the Belaya airfield, this is exactly what I meant. The Russians will still advance all across the front line regardless of what military operations Ukraine conducts inside Russia. This will not change the outcome of the conflict. And also, remember when the green t-shirt went in Kursk, he said that his goal is to keep the Russians busy there so it alleviates the pressure from other fronts. Well, where are we a year later? Well, less than a year later. It's in a worse position for the green t-shirt that he found himself in at the time. And these PR stunts, they don't do anything but to antagonize and provoke and incite even more conflict. By the way, as I was recording this episode, a news flash popped up on my screen. The green t-shirt has now confirmed his attendance to tomorrow's negotiations with Russia. Why do we think that he had to wait until the strike on Belaya airfield took place and only then confirm his participation? Well, this was a clear message to Moscow, of course, meant to provoke and incite. This is nothing new. Again, for some people, it's all about the PR stunt, it's all about the optics, and they're far less concerned with the reality on the ground. Let's carry on to the next and final article. Lithuania does not expect significant results from Russia-Ukraine talks in Istanbul. And this comes from Lithuanian Foreign Minister Kęstutis Budrys. For once in my life, I will have to agree with Mr. Kęstutis Budrys. I also don't believe that anything of value will emerge from tomorrow's negotiations, especially given what has happened today. But that's just my guess. Let's hope we are both wrong. Quote, it depends on the intentions and the mood of the Russian delegation. If they are the same as last time, we know how it all ended. There was no real desire to negotiate and therefore no significant results related to the ceasefire. This will likely be the case this time. So what Mr. Budrys is implying is that unless Russia is prepared to just give things to the green t-shirt for free, well, in that case, there's going to be no result. They all say that Russia is in no mood to negotiate. But why are they making those statements? Well, it's because Russia is not willing to abandon their military objectives. It's that simple. That's the blunt reality. And they say, well, that's proof that Russia is not willing to negotiate. But that's not what a negotiation means. Negotiation doesn't imply that you have to completely abandon your military objectives. It means that you have to look for a compromise. But of course, compromise is not exactly in these people's vocabulary. But he doesn't stop there. They never do. He goes further and makes it even worse. Quote, only alongside the ceasefire can normal full-fledged negotiations on ending the aggression take place. But why, Mr. Budrys? Please support that argument. I would be curious to see how you think. Why do you imagine that negotiations can...
Revolutionary salute to our family. Shout out Thug Autonomy for the donation to the war chest. Revolution is a way of life. Absolutely appreciate the love, family. Salute.
Only take place after a ceasefire. Where in history have you seen that? A ceasefire is, by definition, the result of a successful round of negotiations. If you're not negotiating because you're waiting for a ceasefire, then you're wasting everybody's time. That's just not how things work. You negotiate in good faith, and if things align, well, in that case, you move to the ceasefire. And if things align some more, then you eventually move to the final peace settlement, to the final peace treaty. But you see, in the European Union, everything is backwards, everything is upside down. They do things completely backwards, but they expect good results. Let's move on. Both the United States and Europe must participate in such negotiations. Again, Mr. Budrys, I'm asking the same question. Why? Why do you think that US and Europe should be at the table? I thought that this conflict was only between Russia and Ukraine. This was totally not a proxy war. But if it was to be a proxy war, well, in that case, I agree with you. Europe and the US, the master puppeteers, should also be at the table. Absolutely. In that case, you would make a lot of sense, Mr. Boutros. There must be some results. What we see now is just an imitation. Will Monday show that it is not an imitation? Most likely not. And this is why Ukrainians need even more support, Boutros said. Well, you should have said that from the beginning, Mr. Boutros, because we all knew where this was heading. You can just tell what these people want even before they open their mouth. You just know what the final message is. More money to the green t-shirt. Open your wallet, Jimmy. Don't you just sit on the fence. Don't be on the sidelines. Join the green t-shirt. This is the world we live in, my friends. But let me know what you think. Just to sum up what we have seen, not just with this Belaya airfield attack, but also with the previous attack last night in Bryansk, which I've covered in the previous episode. Do you think this is a coincidence? Do you think this was just the day it just so happened to be? Or do you all also believe, just like me, that this is a coordinated attack on Russia to provoke Vladimir Putin into a response? I think if we look back over the last 3.5 years, this has been the trend. This has been the norm. Provoke, instigate, and then go on TV and cry about it. This is
the Ukraine military strikes back in probably the biggest success tactically that the Ukraine side has had since 2022, the late 2022, when the Ukraine side drove thin Russian forces out of thousands of square kilometers in the Kharkov area. This strike today, the Ukraine side has actually a series of attacks that have gone on inside of Russia that have a lot of impact on what's going to happen on the front line for the first time in a long time. But let me just kind of give you the bottom line up front, because we got a lot to talk about here today, folks. And I've got a lot of information. A lot of this stuff is breaking as we're talking about. So there's partial information. So I'll caveat most of the stuff as is being reported right now. We're certainly going to cover this again tomorrow and whatever comes out overnight. A lot of things to cover, but we don't want to wait till tomorrow because this stuff is moving at the light speed here. And so much is happening. We want to bring you up to date on the latest that's being reported both from the Russian and the Ukraine side here. Let's and by the way, especially for any of those who are new to our channel, please like and subscribe. We'd love to have you keep coming back and get this kind of information here that you just don't hardly get on any other outlet. But let's get right into it. Now, this is being referred to by the Ukraine side in one of the rare cases. They didn't even hesitate to take credit for this one. Very oftentimes, even when Ukraine has done some pretty high-profile things inside of Russia, they don't claim credit for it right away. Sometimes they don't ever do it. This one was different. They came out and said, you see, this is the Kiev Post here, so they're putting it right on their site. The Operation Spiderweb, which they said, and the Ukraine side, of course, is, as you can expect, they said cripples 34% of Russia's bomber fleet. Well, as it's appearing right now, it wasn't quite that bad. It was a severe blow. And let me just point blank say, this was a spectacular tactical operation by the Ukraine side that has caused severe damage to the Russian Air Force. And in the southern part where there was some train derailments and explosions and sabotage inside of Russia, I'll talk about that separately. That is going to really hamper, at least for a period of time, the logistical situation in the Sumy offensive in the front. So there are some damages, but I do want to also say, just from the bottom line up front, this is not going to affect the outcome of the war. It is unchanged. It is huge. It is high profile. It is a severe blow to the Russian side, but they can endure it because their bomber fleets are in the many hundreds. So even if the full number that's claimed by the Ukraine side, which they claim there are 40, the Russian side claims there are less than that, but they do admit that there was some significant damage done. They can absorb it. Number one, they have the ability to, some of the aircraft have been damaged. Some of them have been destroyed beyond repair, but they also have hundreds more in their inventory many of those that are on active duty. This 34 number is the number of strategic bombers on the bases hit, but that's not all the bases that they have, not all the places where those, especially the Tu-95 nuclear capable bombers have been based out of. So let's take a look at what's happened here. What we do know is that this was launched by the head of the SBU, and you saw his picture there on that first image we showed about the spider web. Yeah, that's the guy right there, the SBU. That's their secret services, so to speak, their security services inside of Kiev. The guy has claimed that this has been 18 months in the preparation. You see that he went on with Zelensky today, and they're really, really taking a lot of credit for this. They're saying this was a great deal. They couldn't be happier. A lot of congratulations and celebrations going on inside of Ukraine. And listen, I'm not going to bemoan that. They deserve it. This was from a military perspective, it was really good. The problem is it's going to be, number one, short-term duration. It won't change the course of the war. It'll just be a hiccup on the Russian side because they can absorb it. But then there's also the the response that's going to become, and that could be the biggest consequence to the Ukraine side. Already, this is being called Russia's Pearl Harbor by many on the social media on the Russian side. And there is a lot of anger in Russia. In fact, if we can, I want to show you here. This is a view from the West, and this is what the West wants to believe. This is what they want it to mean. And this is pretty consistent with the way the West views this war anyway, and their actions here. Here from I believe it's France 24. This is how they see it.
It was a wake-up call to Russians that there was a war that the Russian state-controlled media has time and again tried to keep as far from public opinion and the ordinary Russian as possible. It is coming home to roost right now. They can't hide it. Moscow's airports repeatedly in recent days and weeks have had to periodically, for several hours at a time, be shut down. Why? Because of drone activity. Ukraine, like I said, cannot match, nowhere near it in terms of arms, in terms of manpower. But what they can do, and they've gotten very nimble at it, is their domestic drone manufacturing industry. They use those drones in a manner that is able to, with minimal cost, and I would even say minimal manpower, able to drive home a very salient point about this war isn't going away. It's on your doorstep too, and trying to remind the Russian public that they have just as much vested in trying to make sure this war ends as anyone else.
So they think that this is going to remind Russia of the cost of the war. I mean, you have to not be paying any attention at all to understand that a couple of even high-profile strikes like this is not going to cause the Russian population to suddenly go, oh, dang, I didn't know that there was actually a war going on. Okay, well, let's get to Istanbul on Monday, and let's just give them whatever they need to get the war over with. That's what we want to do. I mean, that's what he's suggesting there. And, he even says this is to drive home the point. Okay, folks, in a war, it ain't about scoring points. It's about winning a conflict. And in order to win a war, you have to win campaigns. In order to win campaigns, you have to win battles. This is none of that. This is a strike, and it is a high-profile strike. It's embarrassing to the Russian side, and it's making the happy people on the Ukraine side. It doesn't change the balance of power. That's what we need to understand. And in fact, you talk about the message you want the Russian public to get. The more likely result is going to be that they're going to be more angry, and they're going to put more pressure on Putin to strike more devastatingly. And that's what we're going to talk about, the likely responses here in a minute. As just before we came on air, there was news coming out of Moscow that Putin was meeting with his Security Council. So they're apparently trying to assess the total amount of damage, and then presumably we'll find out at some point what they're going to do. If any history is any guide, Russia is not like the United States in many regards. We have knee-jerk reactions. We want to immediately start bombing somebody when something happens here. Russians always take their time, but when they do strike, they do things that are methodical and make sense and do fit in a strategic outlook. This time, I don't think that the pattern is going to be any different, but I think that it's increasingly likely. I won't make any predictions because I don't know the mindset of President Putin. But I think it's increasingly likely that there is going to be a bigger response than there might have been to other things that have been going on, especially because of the combined nature of this and how it's literally on the 36 hours, these cumulative total here, 36 hours before the detailed so-called peace talks are supposed to happen. Direct talks between Russia and Ukraine are going to happen in Istanbul now in about 12 hours from now. But let me not get ahead of myself. Let's first of all talk about, if you haven't seen what happened, because it is truly impressive in terms of the military craft that went to this. This took, from reports, about 18 months to prepare. So that means that they have been resourcing this. They've been doing reconnaissance. They've been plotting out routes. They probably have sleeper cells inside of Russia, or at least partisan activity inside of Russia. They probably knew the terrain very well, and they've mapped all this stuff out. They've done, no doubt, reconnaissance over the airfields. They knew where the bombers were located. There was report. The way this worked, by the way, is that there were a number of these big trucks, like these kind of 18-wheelers you may see in the United States or so, or sometimes there's these big. They got big boxes on the back of a big hauling truck, and that's what a lot of these were. And I think Gary has a few images of some of those trucks. What they did is they drove them into certain areas inside of Russia, and then they parked them near one of the air bases. Now, what's being reported so far, interestingly enough, is that the guys who were driving were simply contract drivers. They had no idea what they were hauling. They didn't even know what was going on. Apparently, at least in one case, they were told, park in this certain location and someone would come meet you or something like that. Then, from apparently somewhere in Ukraine, maybe in Kiev, remotely through satellite links, then the drones were activated, which in all likelihood could either mean that they had some kind of redundant link to be able to link to a drone operator from somewhere else through a satellite, or they had some kind of AI configuration to where all they had to do was launch the drones, and then the drone itself, because they had done such reconnaissance and they knew where the bombers were located, that it went up and then it was able to identify where it was, and then it would go and attack the planes. So either way you want to talk it, it was amazingly spectacular. Interesting also, at least there are some anecdotal reports coming out of Russia that in some of the places, some of the people, the Russian people actually saw these trucks and recognized what was going on, climbed up on the trucks and started destroying the drones before they even got out. So that's one of the trucks right there. That's what I'm talking about. These kind of trucks. And so you see there goes a drone literally coming out of the top of it right there. So you can see how these things were launched. Apparently that was going on all over the place. These things take off to go in toward their targets, etc. And you can see the smoke in the background from that video image right there. There were, so far as what's being reported by the Russian media, there were 5 air bases that were attacked in this manner. One at Murmansk, one at Irkutsk, one at Ivanovo, Ryazan, and Amur. The Russians said that the attacks were repulsed at 3 of the bases, Ivanovo, Ryazan, and Amur region. Those apparently did not have any targets struck. You can see that map on the screen right there where a lot of these were. Literally, these things are all over the map in Russia. I mean, you're talking thousands of miles from the front lines. So that's how a lot of these happen. Now that you see that in the middle of the screen there where it says Irkutsk, what we evidence is so far is coming in is at least on one of the targets there that there was a truck that went inside Russia, and then it was loaded up and prepared inside Russia. So apparently when the truck itself came across the border, it was not loaded up. But then obviously because of this 18-month preparation, apparently the Ukraine side was able to stockpile some of the drones themselves, the facilities that needed to do it, because they put this basically on the top of those trucks that you saw a minute ago. So even inside the truck, you wouldn't see anything, but apparently up in the roof, there was an image or a cavern where all the drones. I don't know if we have any of those screenshots. I've seen a number of pictures where you could see how those drones were actually launched in there, so that once the tops of those trucks opened up, then they were able to fly out like that. So any way you want to look at it, this was a pretty remarkable operation. But at the end, we're getting into the issue here of what is the significance of it. Now, many in Russia are calling this their Pearl Harbor moment. because they view this as this, you came out of nowhere, you hit us with all this stuff. And because, like I said a minute earlier, don't want to forget this, in addition to the airfields that were hit, because that's what's getting all the main print in the Western media, especially, but there were also 2 separate rail incidents in the southern part of Russia, not too far from one was in the Bryansk area. That's one right there that you see. The other one was in the Kursk area. And in this particular one here, as I understand it, the train was going down the track and the bridge fell on top of it, which derailed it. And at the moment, they said there are 7 people killed and quite a number of others wounded. Now, bear in mind, this was a passenger train. This was not a military train. And so that's one of the things that certainly is making the Russian side really angry, and why they're calling this a Pearl Harbor moment. They're saying this wasn't even a military train, a military transport. It was just a civilian passenger thing. So the bridge was clearly timed to drop so that it fell on top of the train as it came through. In the other occasion, in the other place in the Kursk area, apparently that's the other one there. The train was on the bridge, and the bridge was taken out while the train was going across it. I actually don't have any knowledge at this point. I haven't been able to research it to find out, was that a military train, or was it also a passenger train? That I'm not sure about. I'll have to check into that. Hopefully we can get that to you in the morning. But these damage here, these are causing some problems for the Russians at the front. This is one of the successes that the Ukraine side has had, because a lot of these rail lines here are used to reinforce the Russians on their offensive, especially in the Sumy area and along the northern front, partially also in the Kursk, the Kharkiv area where the Russians are attacking in there. But listen, you got to understand, again, just before I came on air here, I was looking at some of the Russian media, and there's already images of people, some just regular people helping out. The officials, they're already starting to clear the rubble, and they're going to try and repair these bridges. And, especially when you get into wartime, folks, when you're motivated, you may recall during World War II, especially in the Germans, we kept bombing bridges all the time. Or in Vietnam, we would bomb bridges. Korea, we would bomb bridges, knock them out, and then they would figure out how to get them up within days to have them function. You don't have to get it perfect like you will in a civilian time here, but if they need to, they can get this stuff repaired rather rapidly. So I think this is going to be a temporary success for the Ukraine side. It may slow down the Russians, but of course they have plenty of logistics already on the front line there, so it's not going to run out, and there are alternative means. But it's going to make it a lot more complicated in the south there. But all this together has made a lot of Russians angry. Some of the anger, I'll point out, is actually at the Russians themselves. I've seen a lot of comments on some of the Russian social media that they've said, hey, props to the Ukraine side. They caught us with their pants down. We were not prepared for this. The sophistication that was involved with, both with technologically, with how this system operated, the secrecy that it got in there. Nobody was able to talk about it, and it had significant damage to our bomber forces in the north. So they give props to that. Then some of the anger is turned toward the Russians, because they're saying, how could we not be ready for this? We know that the danger of drones, we know that this is possible. And for many times, there's been long-range drones struck throughout Russia. So this is not the first time that a deep strike inside Russia has been successful. There have been, you may recall, several months ago, we showed you there was actually a whole series of oil facilities and oil refineries inside Russia that were hit by drones that got through. So you would think, especially your strategic nuclear bomber force, that you recognize that that's a high-value target for the enemy. Because a lot of these are also, it's not just nuclear weapons they fire, they're also firing a lot of these long-range weapons and cruise missiles that have been firing into Ukraine. So they know that that's going to be a high priority target. And a lot of the questions are, I think, pretty valid. Why didn't you have, drone defenses set up? Why don't you have the netting that you may see on some of the front lines here? I've shown you and talked to you about how some of the logistic lines that actually both sides use now, they have these literally massive nets, fishing nets or other kinds of nets that they will almost have a tunnel of in the resupply locations in the tactical area, so that the FPV drones can't fly through and hit the trucks. Or if they do, they blow up in the netting, not on the truck here. And people are asking, why didn't you do that with our bomber forces? Now, apparently all the news isn't bad from the Russian side, because at least from what they're claiming, 3 of the airfields that were attacked did not succeed. So they were able to stop some of those from hitting. So it's not all bad, but the Russians aren't happy about that. But the rest of the Russian anger, the majority of it, is actually focused on the Ukraine side, because they said, okay, and some of the op-eds that I saw, or one of the op-eds that I saw just before we came on air here, it said, this is it. We shouldn't even do any diplomacy anymore. We've reached out a hand that we've been willing to consider a diplomatic end to this, that he didn't use the term, but the ones I use, ugly terms, but it's a negotiated settlement that would end the fighting. And instead, Ukraine does this. And so they're saying, all right, when we meet together in Istanbul, and by the way, both parties have gone. The Umarov is leading the delegation from the Ukraine side. Apparently, he's already on set. Medinsky is leading the Russian delegation. He's actually, Gary actually has some video of him on site.
Скажите, пожалуйста, как удары по российской территории?
Все видел, все знаю, все знаю. Not cry later. That's what's
so you see there, he's on site, and of course the first question everybody's going to be asking him, because that's where all the Western cameras are, is what do you think about these strikes and what are you going to do? And he's basically waving them off, and we'll talk about that tomorrow. He mentioned a memorandum there. There has been some debate going back and forth and aggravation on the two sides. Russia said because of the first meeting they had in Istanbul between the two sides a couple of weeks ago, they agreed that they would give each side a memorandum that listed basically a term sheet. This is our entry-level terms for what we want. This is what the Ukraine side would give, and then they said they would exchange them. Well, for some reason, and I don't know if it was agreed to or not, and Russia changed it, but the Ukraine side believed that Russia would give it to them before the meeting. But Russia said, and they were clear about this before, they said, we will give you the memorandum at the meeting. That's the point, in their view, of the working level meeting, whereas apparently the Ukraine side already gave their call sheet to at least the United States. And Russia hasn't given it to anyone, and Medinsky still hasn't. The media that I looked at just before coming on air again, they reiterated that they're not sharing anyone. It's not even in the Russian media. They're not sharing what it is. But I don't think it's very hard to figure out what it is, because Russia's been pretty consistent in what they've been looking for from the outset. Now, the question is going to be, what is going to happen as a result of this? How will all of these actions impact what the negotiating teams are going to say? Potentially, one reason they aren't saying anything about the memorandum now is because maybe they'll change it before tomorrow. Because one of the things the Russians have been saying of late is that what was going to be in this memorandum is going to be the harshest terms that there's been offered to date, with the caveat that if these diplomatic offers aren't taken, then the next time, if there is a next time, it's going to be worse. Now, you saw, if you watched our shows last week, and again, but we ask you to subscribe to our channel if you're new to us here, because you get stuff like this as it's breaking. We give you this kind of information here that, frankly, almost no other Western outlets are producing, and we do this all the time. We got the great team here with Gary Villapiano behind the camera and in the research department. And what they have said is that what Medvedev said in one of our shows last week is this is the last chance. He said it actually, he was interviewed, not interviewed, but he was given a speech in front of a legal forum. And he said, this is the last chance for peace right here. You had Nebenzia, Ambassador Nebenzia at the United Nations Security Council just a few days ago said that this is it. This is the chance for negotiated settlement. And if we don't get our terms at the negotiated settlement, then it's going to be won on the battlefield. He just straight up said it. That's not an interpretation. That's not he kind of meant. He expressly said, we will win on the battlefield. So we already knew where Russia's head was heading into this. So then you got to think about the Ukraine side. If they're doing any kind of rational cost analysis, cost benefit analysis, looking at the balance of power between the two sides, who's got the most manpower, ammunition, aircraft, air defense, intel, all those things, then obviously it's off the chart. Russia's way up in the top, Ukraine's way down on the bottom. Anyone can do this kind of an assessment if you have any intelligence at all. Doesn't take hard. So if you know where the Russians are diplomatically heading into this, then what would be the benefit to you to have this high profile strike on the eve of the next direct discussions? I mean, is there some kind of, I don't know, psychosis or just detachment from reality that, like that analyst on France 24 there, where you think that this is going to send a message that is going to make the Russians back down. I mean, that would be irrational, especially for anybody in Ukraine. Nobody knows the Russians better than the Ukrainians, certainly better than anybody in the West. I mean, they were part of the Soviet Union together. They've been fighting in one form or another since 2014, et cetera. So there shouldn't be any doubt about what the Russians believe and what they think and what they're capable of. Look, you just got to say it. I can't get into anybody's mind. I don't have any access to behind the scenes of anybody anywhere. But just looking at this situation here, because of the knowns, the things that we know about, what Russia is overtly saying, and what we can physically count with the balance of power, et cetera, that if you were willing, if you wanted to have peace, if you wanted the war to come to an end and you knew you couldn't win militarily, then you would calm things down. Remember, all these strikes, by the way, that President Trump talked about, he was so angry about last week, coming from Russia against Kiev. Well, he either wasn't aware or, I don't know, just disregarded. I don't know. But those drone strikes were going back and forth between the capitals. Both sides were doing it for many, many days in a row. There was hundreds going in one direction, hundreds going in the other. The war was ongoing. If you want to end the war, and you realize now after closing in on 3.5 years of fighting that you can't even stop Russia, and there's no chance that you could ever push them back. So then you want to say, all right, well, what's the best we can get out of this? Let's get a negotiated settlement, keep as much terrain as we can, and preserve as much of our own freedom and independence as we can, so that we can rebuild and have some sort of a life. That's what a rational person would do. But if you didn't want the war to come to an end, if you actually wanted it to continue on, then in light of the known balance of power imbalance between the two, then you would do some kind of a high profile thing that would be intended to spawn a bigger reaction on the Russian side. And look, the evidence is there. The strikes did happen. They were planned for a long time. They were clearly connected with those two train strikes on top of it. And look, I think that it's pretty clear that the Russians are not going to take this lying down because they have the power to do something about it. And I think that what may come out is that Russia, this meeting tomorrow, I think it's not out of the realm of the possibility that they instead of giving them a memorandum, they may give them an ultimatum. They may say, this is your final chance here. You either submit to the terms on this sheet, or the next thing is going to be, we're going to have a meeting at the presidential palace in Kiev, and we're going to physically show up with our army. That's what could happen. It's entirely within the character of Russia to do that. They have done it before. And that in the Second World War, there came a point. I think I perceive and I calculate that it was really the Battle of Kursk in 1943, which tipped the scales irrevocably against the Germans. At that point, from that point forward, there was no going back. And then you had the Potsdam Congress, and the West, or the Allies altogether. It wasn't just the West, because it included the Soviet Union at that time. They said, now we're just going on to full victory. That's all there's going to be. We're just going to go for unreserved surrender for the German side. That's what they were going to go after here. And then they did. And then they went all the way through, and the Battle of Bagration, was the kind of the last throw to it. And there's many in Russia who want exactly that kind of strategy now. So if the West and Ukraine were actually trying to get this done to where they wanted to say, hey, we want the war to continue, because maybe in the mind of some, and we've had some on our show who speculate that there are those in Europe that actually want to drag this out, because they don't want to have the Trump version where there's a negotiated settlement and the war gets off the table, and the two sides settle and basically Russia wins. They don't want that. So they wanted to drag out the war until Trump leaves, and then hope that they get a Democrat on the other side that'll go back to the Biden way. That's what is, according to some sources that we've had on our show here, say about the European side. If that's what they think, and if Zelensky is in league with that, and they think, yeah, that's the best case, all we got to do is just stay alive. We just have to avoid defeat. And then later on, I don't think there'll be a later on, folks, because there's no evidence that President Trump is going to say, yeah, I'm going to go ahead and go in. I'm going to facilitate that. And because for that to happen, Trump has to reverse course and say, all right, I'm going to support Ukraine. We're going to go back to the Biden era times, because that's what you'd have to have. You'd have to have all the ammunition that we can provide, a replacement for almost all the howitzers, many more than 31 M1 tanks, and then a whole bunch more Stryker vehicles and Bradley fighting vehicles, all kinds of things. It would have to go back to large-scale investment, and obviously air defense missiles, Patriots, etc. All those things would have to go back in to even theoretically be able to say we're going to go on to fighting for years to try to get to another one. And Trump shows no evidence that he's willing to do that. You saw the Secretary of State in Senate testimony about a week and a half ago. He said, hey, folks, we don't have those kind of air defense capacities. We don't have any more Patriots to give, and we're not going to. So there shouldn't be any delusion on that side. But again, I'm just telling you, I'm just assessing what we see, what we can count, and what we know. And the evidence is really starting to look like that there is some delusion so far detached from reality that they are willing to take steps to make sure that Russia doesn't achieve a ceasefire, that Russia doesn't end.
Mr. President, such a pleasure.
So we're just going to have to wait and see how this unfolds. But I think some of the next thing here is that we're going to find out what President Putin decides to do. I mean, we'll see maybe as early as tomorrow about this diplomacy thing, whether there's an ultimatum given or not. And then many are saying, hey, well, there's a reason why Russia tested that Oreshnik missile several months ago, and they've been producing them quite a lot in between now and then. So some say that may be the next time, because since this strategic targets were hit in Russia and they were big and painful, that there's going to be a big and painful strike in retaliation. Some are suggesting it won't be a tit for tat, which is kind of common in the Russian viewpoint, where they've done that diplomatically a lot, but that it will be like a 3x for a 1x. So whatever happened to the Russian side because of this Ukrainian attack could be threefold in retaliation on some big important strategic target. And lest people think and buy into some of these Western commentators that the Russian side hasn't done a lot of these things because they can't. They haven't advanced any faster and farther than they have because they can't. All the targets that they've attacked, that's the best they can do. There is a lot of evidence to suggest that these are very carefully calculated decisions on the Russian side to minimize casualties on the Ukraine side, to maximize military significant strikes, but they have left things out, like the power ministries in Kiev. They have not taken out the SBU, and I think that's one of the more likely probabilities for targets because they took such bold credit for it. The presidential palace, the Verkhovna Rada, their parliament building, all those things have not been touched. I think the SBU was hit once minor, but no real damage and certainly no sustained activities. And then there are other things too, intelligence services, etc. There's a lot of targets that could be gone after inside Kiev within their command structure and their headquarters that they haven't done yet. All those things could happen as a result of this. And of course, from what we've seen anyway from this Oreshnik, it doesn't matter whether we're talking about Patriot systems, THAAD, anything. We can't knock those things down. They're just coming in too fast, and they may even have maneuverable warheads, etc. And if that happens, folks, I mean, just probably, I think we can count on something big is going to come. I think there's too much anger on the Russian side. There's been too many of them, even at the highest levels, thinking that they've been too patient. And then with this big kind of in-your-face strike here and something that will definitely hurt, Russia does have a big bomber fleet, but man, you can't lose, even if the lower number is right and it's 20 or 30 bombers and other military aircraft. That is a painful hit, one-day hit tally. It's big. But the question is, how much more can the Russian side take without amping things up and expanding their target set? And I think that's what we're going to end up seeing. We'll wait and see how it goes out there.
And he's been working on that story flat out, but he's definitely across what else happened today, which, if anything, is even more serious. And he's agreed to be with us tonight. Che Bose, very warm welcome and a big thanks for exceptional.
Yes, sir.
By terrorist action over the last 24 hours.
Well, George, thanks. Again, thanks for having me on. Your show is an exceptionally important platform for people who want to share, the other side's view. It's a remarkably important thing, and it deserves all support that anyone can give it. So I'm in Bryansk. I came here, as soon as I heard the news, I was dispatched here, and I was the first reporter on the scene, if you like, of the actual catastrophe. Is the only thing you can call it. There were two bridges that came down last night, about 24 hours ago, a little more. One in the Kursk region, which adjoins Bryansk, where I am, and one here in Bryansk. Now, these areas of Russia, south of Moscow, are very close to Ukraine, of course, and are very liable to infiltration from Ukrainian DRGs or disruption groups, saboteur groups from the Ukrainian military. And not so long ago, about 4 kilometers from the bridge, one of these groups was engaged with by the Russian security forces, and firefights opened up about 3-4 days before this bridge came down. Many people are suggesting that these may have been the people responsible. The scene I came across was shocking. I mean, in this job, I've seen a lot of things. I've seen a lot of conflict. I've seen a lot of human trauma. But this was just on a scale of a war zone. The train had been essentially upended. The engine, as you mentioned earlier, carrying the crew, had been completely crushed, maybe to within half a meter. It was impossible to survive that. I posted a video of what I saw online on my X channel. People are free to have a look. Very shocking. A huge response from the Russian emergencies ministry. About 180 people went there to assist. Very luckily, there was a very small roadway running alongside the track at that point. You can see that in the video. Very difficult terrain. The start of the summer here in Russia, people making their way to Moscow. Absolutely no military use for this rail line. These are just ordinary people, children, babies. One 8-month-old baby critically ill now in Moscow, flown to Moscow with critical injuries. You could be heard screaming inside one of the carriages as it was trapped there. The horror of this is remarkable. Anybody from London 7-7, these assaults that have happened on ordinary civilians should be acutely aware of what is being done, potentially in their name, and who's funding it and who's the architect of it. A very traumatic day for us to witness that, feel a little bit helpless to see it. But it's also it makes you feel quite angry. It makes you feel quite angry about the narrative within the Western media, BBC, CNN, the client media, as I like to call them, and as you are more than familiar with, that this is 2 bridges collapsed, despite the fact that the SBU admitted in the last 24 hours blowing up a bridge in Melitopol in Donbass, in Donetsk, that region. And this stuff has happened before. We know how they're operating. This was quite an isolated stretch of railway. To suggest that this bridge fell, a very modern-looking bridge, just collapsed on a train at the exact moment that train was going underneath it. Or in the other case in Kursk, that this freight train that was blown up essentially. It just so happened, and they both so happened to happen within hours of each other, is fanciful, to use the term that Oscar Wilde was fond of. And of course, it comes in the context, as you say, of a lot of other things happening here in Russia in relation to what happens next in Ukraine.
Well, let's turn to that, not in any way to diminish the horror of what you witnessed and reported on peerlessly. The attack and the apparent destruction of 4 Russian Air Force nuclear bombers. I don't know if they were actually totally destroyed, but if I was an insurance broker, I'd definitely be expecting a write-off on 4 essential parts of Russia's nuclear defense force. Now, no nuclear-armed country can tolerate an attack on its nuclear force because that potentially changes the nuclear parity with adversaries and leaves the country open to complete destruction. So it's a very, very serious matter to attack aircraft that are nuclear capable and could even have been nuclear armed, but weren't, thank God. This is being hailed by the propagandists of the Ukraine as a turning point. I'm sure that it is, but probably not in the way they hope it is. What's your take on that, Jay?
Well, I don't think anything happens by accident when it comes to what's happened in Ukraine, particularly actions within Russia. So this strike, or this attempted strike on, I think, 4 Russian strategic bomber bases, only 1, maybe 2 had any kind of impact. We think objective observers say that the maximum of 6 aircraft have been impacted, probably 4 damaged, maybe destroyed. We don't know. Several of the other attacks were thwarted. The drones were shot down or disabled by electronic warfare. This doesn't happen by accident. This is being portrayed by Ukraine as, we told you so. We told you to have a ceasefire. We demanded it of you, that you would commit to a ceasefire unconditionally, despite the fact that you're winning, advancing at the most rapid pace in Donbass in several years of war, essentially. That Russia would be, in some ludicrous reality, obliged to agree to a ceasefire with a country openly sponsoring the assassination of senior military figures, journalists, threatening other journalists, myself included, with death on a daily basis. So this idea, this fanciful notion that Russia is obliged to engage with Mr. Zelensky's regime is remarkable, quite remarkable. A man going into probably the 7th year of his term as a president of 5-year presidency. Quite remarkable. But it doesn't happen by accident. I think that's what's important for the viewers, that this operation was highly technical. It was a long time in the planning. And it struck at a very, very, as you say, pertinent part of Russia's triad, nuclear triad, which is quite remarkable. Can you imagine a Mexican drugs gang doing exactly the same thing to American strategic bombers? Because the other reality of this is these actions and these tactics can be deployed by anybody with access to drones, the internet, a lorry, and some explosives. Remember, this is not that complicated. It was audacious and it was successful to a degree in PR, but that's about it. Because remember, Russia has well over 70 strategic nuclear bombers. 4 have probably been damaged, maybe lost. Even if they were, they can be recreated. And they will be done. Same with the fleet in the Black Sea. Ukraine, remember, was briefly winning the war in Ukraine because it had sank several Russian ships in the Black Sea. We're not hearing about that anymore. Ukraine was also winning the war when it invaded Kursk in a catastrophic suicide mission, which cost the lives of probably 100,000 men and incalculable material and war treasure. They were also winning then, remember, all forgotten. They were winning in 2023 when they embarked on this cataclysmic counteroffensive, which was going to drive the Russians out of Crimea. So you have to take this stuff with a pinch of salt. It might be something of a PR victory. And as you say, with the completely delusional think tank fantasists online talking about entire nuclear arsenal Russia is now crippled. It's almost laughable. I think what this is about, and the fingerprints, the DNA of another foreign power are certainly all over this. We know that the British government is intimately related to the SBU, who have claimed responsibility for this. Mr. Budanov, the head of one element of that, awarded a medal by the Polish government this week, quite remarkably. And at the same time, Mr. Duda was telling us that the OUN UPA, who are idolized in Ukraine, are Nazis and war criminals. So there's a remarkable psychosis at the moment around Ukraine. We know that Mr. Merz doesn't really want to arm Ukraine with long-range weapons. So he comes up with this almost Arthurian myth that he's going to fund the development of a long-range Ukrainian weapon, excuse me, with which to strike Moscow. This is, again, obfuscation of a responsibility, when very quickly Russia said that if you did that, we would be obliged to strike the origin, the places of origin of those weapons. It's a very cynical move. And again, we're back again where we always seem to be, George, with the reality that in the West, the only energy of forward motion seems to be escalation. There's no real engagement, remember, from Europe or the British with the Russians. They're not really involved. They talk to each other, but they don't talk to the Russians. And this belief that they can force Russia's hand into some sort of radical, escalatory move by doing this kind of thing, hoping Russia might do something out of character. The Russians will not do that. There'll be no nuclear strike from Russia. There'll be no strike on London or anywhere else at this stage, because the Russians understand the game that they're being forced into playing. And I don't think Mr. Putin is going to sing his lines according to what's written from in Whitehall or Washington. It's very clear that Russia is winning on the battlefield in Donbass day by day. There's less and less of Ukraine to argue about at the talks. The talks tomorrow will be very, very interesting, of course, and we await to see what, if anything, comes from them. Hard to see when you would expect some sort of military response from Russia. But I think that response, again, will be measured to the frustration of many in Russia and to the frustration of many watching. But again, if you step back and have a look at this, why would Mr. Putin play a role written from in Whitehall or in Washington? I don't think it's going to happen, George.
Is it being reported in Russia now that a response is underway? Because on social media, it's full of Excalibur missiles raining down on Kiev. There's air raid sirens going off throughout the country. Do you expect a larger than usual response to this particularly egregious act?
Well, George, you know the Russians somewhat. I know them a little better after living and working among them. But as Mr. Churchill said, enigma wrapped in an enigma. I always get this analogy wrong, but they're not prone to drama. They're not prone to theater. And as I say, they will step back and look at this. They will find who was responsible. They will draw up a response, and it will be Mr. Putin himself and his Security Council, I'm sure, not that I'd be privy to that, will make that decision. And it is the difference between chaos and stability that the world has to thank Mr. Putin for, in my view. An exceptionally calm leader who is remarkably constrained and restrained. And the enemies of Russia know that there's a growing resolve in Russia to fight this war to its natural conclusion on the battlefield. So this is also an interesting stratagem by them to try and put pressure on the Russian government to act in what would be very popular in Russia, to strike decision-making centers, maybe. There's a lot of senior political figures and media commentators speak in that way. But I still think Mr. Putin will maintain direction. And he's done this since he sat in front of us in 2022 and said they will denazify Ukraine and they will demilitarize Ukraine. That's happening day by day on the ground. Planes can be rebuilt, tanks can be rebuilt, but territory once held by Russia is very difficult to take back. And that, I think, is the priority of the Russians right now. I think there will be a response. And I think remember, this is also something that the Ukrainians can probably do once. It's like the famous party trick of being able to make your head blow up. You can only do it once, because the Russians will now tighten everything, just like they did with Storm Shadow, ATACMS, everything else. The Russians learn very quickly, and in war, they become masterful at the game of war, about understanding how to counter these threats. And I think this is now one more trick the Ukrainians won't be able to pull off. 4 damaged planes, even if 4 to 10 of them were destroyed, Russia has 70 of these long-range nuclear missile carriers. They can manufacture many more. And anyway, these would not probably be used to deliver any kind of significant role in a nuclear conflict with the West, as that would be from a Sarmat missile deep beneath the Atlantic Ocean, completely unknown to anybody except probably Mr. Putin and a select few. So the relevance of this, it's a PR victory in the minds of people who want to discount the failed counteroffensive, want to discount the catastrophe incurred, want to discount the fact that Ukraine is a dictatorship, dragging its own people off the street. But elsewhere, it's seen as what it is, an act of desperation and an attempt to make Russia act in a very irresponsible, aggressive, knee-jerk manner. And I just don't see them doing that. As unpopular as it might be within Russia right now after what's happened over the last 24, 48 hours, I think Mr. Putin will stick to his guns and continue on mission.
Finally and briefly, because I know you need to get to sleep, there's a fella called John Healey. I've known him for decades. You'd be forgiven for never having heard his name before. I called him earlier an inky-fingered clerk, and that's what he always seemed to me to be like. You wouldn't have put him in charge of a quartermaster's store in a small army base anywhere. Believe me, I'm not exaggerating. But he was at the Rusi rostrum, I think yesterday, reported today, saying that Britain was preparing for war with Russia. It's kind of like the flea on the arse of the elephant, warning the elephant it's going to get it. How do people in Russia, I'm sure they've never heard of John Healey, but what do they think of Britain?
Well, interestingly, George, as you'll know, having spent some time in Russia, the Russians are exceptionally fond of the ordinary British people, very fond of them, very interested in British culture, as they are in Irish culture. Irish dancing, very popular here. London, a beloved city among the Russians. So there's a sense of dismay and bemusement among ordinary Russians as to why the British have suddenly declared war on Russia. I mean, they don't share a land border. I mean, I think what the Russians believe, and again, as you know, the Russians are exceptionally well educated politically, from the taxi driver to the politician. They see Russia or the UK as an empire in decline, scrambling for relevance, particularly now that it's away from the table in the European Union. Another increasingly irrelevant and desperate organization. So it's a war of distraction. It's a war of fear, of justification, because remember, Russia has very clearly shown in Ukraine that despite an amalgam of 55 countries and the entirety of NATO and the entirety of NATO's manufacturing capacity, Russia is still advancing. The war isn't over. 17,000 sanctions against Russia. It isn't working. They have failed in Ukraine. NATO has failed. NATO is a very fractious organization where Greece and Turkey are both members, but who would be obliged to invade each other if one invaded the other on the island of Cyprus, remember, George. It's a ludicrous situation. And the failure in Ukraine to end Russia's determined push to denazify and demilitarize this junta in Kiev demonstrates that. So what is the way out of this to accept? You're a seasoned politician. Do you expect anybody to stand up in the British Parliament and say, look, we got it completely wrong following our American colleagues into this catastrophic proxy war in on the other side of the continent? Of course they're not going to do that. They can't do it no more than Mrs. von der Leyen can do it, and expose the egregious lack of foresight and obligation to the welfare of Europeans, much as Mr. Starmer, as you very correctly say, this pernicious man who has declared not enough money for pensioners' fuel. He's tried to backtrack on it now. but there's plenty of money for new weapons, 6 weapons factories. The Russians, remember, manufacture more artillery shells, for example, heavy artillery, tanks, and fighter jets probably than the entirety of NATO does, 4 times over. 4 times. That's from Washington to Istanbul, imagine. The Russians manufacture 4 times more, maybe more. It will take decades and decades for them to even reach any kind of remote parity. That's an exceptionally important thing. This is all talk. Britain, by the way, had about 200 aging Challenger tanks at the start of the Ukraine, this phase of the conflict in Ukraine. It gave, I think, a dozen of them to Ukraine. Several were destroyed very rapidly by the Russians, and they were secretly and very quietly pulled away from the front. Britain has less than a battalion of battle tanks. It has less than 100,000 men in any kind of capacity to fight a war. It has no military manufacturing capacity. Its navy is in a lot of trouble. And it's a society which is exceptionally unlikely to volunteer its young manhood and women to die in a war for a man who seems to be the most unpopular politician that's ever graced the House of Parliament in a generation. Why on earth would Britain's young people stir themselves from the monotony of trying to survive in an increasingly fractured society to go and die in a war for Keir Starmer? If anyone can answer that question, I'd be delighted to hear the answer.
Attack using drones. It hit 5 Russian military airfields. Apparently, it's inflicted some damage to Russian strategic military aircraft. The extent of the damage, obviously, we still don't know, but it's obviously a major coup for Ukraine and for Ukraine's backers, particularly as it's coming on the eve of the big meeting in Istanbul. And apparently the meeting will go ahead. Ukraine has named the delegation to go to Istanbul. The head of the delegation will be Umerov, the defense minister, and Russia also has named its negotiating team. So the meeting will go ahead. However, without question, Russia comes in a somewhat weakened and embarrassed state because this drone attack was not only audacious and very, very specifically targeted. The attack was carried out from within Russian territory itself. So it wasn't from Ukraine, it was within Russian territory itself, because some of the targets were very, very far from Ukraine, and therefore could only be done from within Russia. Seemingly they were rather successful. Now, Ukraine has in the past pulled off some rather astonishing coups, catching the Russians and everyone else by surprise. Think of the counteroffensive of September 2022, which seemed to catch everyone by surprise. And then think of the invasion of Kursk last August. But of course, one shouldn't be caught by surprise. One should be expecting these kinds of coups, particularly on the eve of a big meeting. Now, who exactly was behind this, who planned this, are obviously things that we don't know as yet. We haven't been told. Hard to believe that there wasn't extensive Western involvement in these attacks. As we've pointed out many, many times before, drone attacks require very sophisticated satellite technology. It's satellite technology is needed to identify the targets. Satellite technology is needed to evade Russian air defense system. It needs to evade Russian anti-missile defense systems. So you have to have satellites that guide missiles through all the labyrinth of defensive systems. So there's no question, you can't just simply shoot something off and hope that it lands on target. Now, who exactly was behind it? Whether these were rogue elements within the United States, whether President Trump himself has signed off on it, whether it was the British, the French, the Germans, we don't as yet know. We may never know, but you know, one can speculate. But clearly, this does demonstrate, as I have pointed out repeatedly, despite the criticisms that I receive, that Ukraine is far from defeated. Ukraine is far from collapsed. And Ukraine is far from being on its last legs. Unfortunately, the Russians should have been a little bit better prepared. So let's just take a look at some of the news stories on this attack of today. So here we have the map of just where the drones hit, where these military airfields were located. As you can see, they are a long way from Ukraine. I mean, the one in Belaya in Irkutsk region is way, way far. Then we have the two that are some east of Moscow. We have Ivanovo in the Ivanovo region, and Dyagilevo in the Ryazan region. And then we have up in the north in the Murmansk region, we have Severomorsk and Olenia in the Murmansk region. So, you know, they're a long way from Ukraine, which again shows the boldness of this attack. And of course, the Ukrainians have been cock-a-hoop with glee and are delightedly boasting about this accomplishment. Zelensky sent out this tweet saying, head of the security service of Ukraine, Vasil Malyuk, delivered a report regarding today's operation, an absolutely brilliant result, a result achieved solely by Ukraine. Now, the fact that Zelensky says achieved solely by Ukraine doesn't mean we need to believe it for 1 minute. First of all, it's understandable why he would want to take credit for its success. So, you know, we should hold off a little bit. We need to determine tomorrow just how successful it was, how much real damage the drones inflicted. I mean, the humiliation for Russia is apparent, but in terms of actual damage, we still don't really know. But you know, it's understandable that the Ukraine would want to take all the credit and allow the Western powers, his Western backers, to enjoy plausible deniability. We had nothing to do with it. Look, Zelensky said, it was all done by Ukraine. Now he says 1 year, 6 months, and 9 days from the start of planning to effective execution. So he claims it was an 18-month plan. So if that's the case, that's 18 months, then it's very interesting that he does it on the eve of these peace talks. You'd have to think that the Russians will arrive in a very unwholesome mood. I don't think they will be very positively inclined toward the Ukrainians. So you can think that really, if you want to sabotage any possible negotiations, that's exactly what you should do. Just a few hours before a meeting, you launch a massive, humiliating drone attack. Our most long-range operation, our people involved in preparing the operation were withdrawn from Russian territory in time. So what he's saying here, and I think this is what's important, is that he's admitting that the drones were launched from Russian territory. I think that's very, very important to remember that the attacks were launched from Russian territory. He says our people involved in preparing the operation were withdrawn from Russian territory in time. As we'll see, Russia denies this. Russia said it made arrests. Now, whether the arrests were the people who were directly involved in this, he says our people involved in preparing the operation were withdrawn from Russian territory in time. We don't know yet, but he's claiming that that they were withdrawn. Russia is saying that they made arrests. I thanked General Malyuk for the success of Ukraine. I instructed the security service of Ukraine to inform the public about the details and results of the operation that can be disclosed. Of course, not everything can be revealed at this moment, but these are Ukrainian actions that will undoubtedly be in history books. Ukraine is defending itself, and rightly so. We are doing everything to make Russia feel the need to end this war. Russia started this war. Russia must end it. Glory to Ukraine. So then we have this quite interesting article where Axios is always very tuned in to what's going on in Washington. I mean, its raison d'etre is, to be the insider's insider. Ukraine launches massive drone strike on air bases deep inside Russia, and says why it matters. The wide-ranging attack took place shortly before Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky announced he's sending a delegation headed by Minister of Defense Rustem Umerov to ceasefire talks with Russia in Istanbul on Monday. I have to say it, but because one needs to say it, these are not ceasefire talks. They're talks about a settlement, about a lasting settlement in Ukraine. But however, the media always want to focus just on this thing of the ceasefire, the 30-day ceasefire talks. They're not a ceasefire talks. They're peace talks. Ukraine did not notify the Trump administration of the attack in advance, a Ukrainian official said. So this repeats what Zelensky said, and the fact that a Ukrainian official says this doesn't mean anything. That may well be a condition of the Americans assisting, is that you deny that the Americans were in any way involved. Now, as I say, there had to have been some Western involvement, could well be within the Pentagon. And within the Pentagon, if they were involved, it's very unlikely that they would have told Trump. You don't tell the president about very delicate operations. That's the whole point. You give the president plausible deniability. So that doesn't mean that Trump didn't approve of it, but they probably just didn't tell him because they don't want to put him in a position of knowing about something, and then he has to explain himself and has to admit something or lie about it. So you just don't tell the president what happened. A U.S. official also told reporters the Trump administration was not made aware of the attack. Again, that's what a U.S. official would say. You don't really expect the U.S. official to admit that the Trump administration was involved, particularly at the moment when Trump is trying to act as a mediator. Anyway, it says, this is Axios again, driving the news, a Ukrainian official told Axios the operation was conducted by the country's security service and was planned for more than a year. That's the same what Zelensky tweeted out. The official said intelligence officers launched attack drones from trucks that have been covertly placed near Russian air bases, some of them in Siberia, thousands of kilometers from Ukraine. So that's the important point, that the drones were launched from trucks deep inside Russia, trucks that were parked near Russian air bases. So that requires quite a lot of sophisticated planning, and certainly a breakdown in Russian security, breakdown in Russian intelligence in allowing these trucks to be parked near, when we have to think, highly secret military air bases. Around 40 Russian military planes, among them strategic bombers, were reportedly hit in the attack. So these are strategic bombers. In other words, they carry nuclear weapons. 40, that's the estimate given, were hit. We don't know the extent of the damage, but that's the number that is appearing in all the media reports. A Ukrainian official said the planes that were attacked were used by the Russian military for air strikes on Ukrainian cities. The Russian Ministry of Defense confirmed air bases in 5 different parts of Russia were attacked. In 3 of the regions, the attacks were repelled, the ministry claimed. According to the ministry, several aircraft caught fire but have been extinguished following the attacks in the Murmansk and Irkutsk regions. There were no casualties in the attacks. And then we have the Reuters story. It says, to attack Russian air bases, Ukrainian spies hid drones in wooden sheds. So this elaborates on the truck story. So now it turns out that there were sheds parked on top of the trucks, and it was inside the sheds that the drones were located. So it says Ukrainian secret services were able to attack strategic bomber aircraft at Russian air bases on Sunday by hiding explosive-laden drones inside the roofs of wooden sheds. Ukraine's domestic security at the SBU acknowledged that it carried out the operation, codenamed Spider's Web, and said it had caused considerable damage. And then it says the sheds were loaded onto trucks that were driven to the perimeter of the air bases. The roof panels of the sheds were lifted off by a remotely activated mechanism, allowing the drones to fly fly out and begin their attack. The security official, who spoke on condition of anonymity, said strikes were conducted on Sunday on 4 air bases. 41 Russian warplanes were hit. An SBU statement posted on the Telegram messaging app estimated the damage caused was around $7 billion. Again, we don't have to take any of that seriously. They have no idea what the damage is, or how much how much the damage will cost. 34% of the strategic cruise missile carriers at the main airfields of the Russian Federation were hit. Zelensky said the SBU had set up a nerve center for the operation right next to a regional office of Russia's FSB intelligence service. All operatives taking part had been brought out of Russia on the eve of the operation. So that was, he was suggesting that in the tweet. And here is, of course, gloating by declaring that the nerve center of the operation was located right next to regional office of Russia's FSB. And then CNN, Ukraine targets several Russian air bases in large-scale operation. And then this it says more than 40 aircraft were known to have been hit, including the Tu-95, Tu-22M3 strategic bombers, and one of Russia's few remaining A-50 surveillance planes. According to the SBU, the operation caused an estimated $7 billion damage and hit 34% of Russia's strategic cruise missile carriers. The airfields targeted, including Belaya in Irkutsk, some 4,500 kilometers from Ukraine's border with Russia, and the Diaghilevo base in Ryazan in western Russia, about 520 kilometers from Ukraine. And then the Olenia base near Murmansk in the Arctic Circle, more than 2,000 kilometers from Ukraine, was also struck, as well as the Ivanovo air base, more than 800 kilometers from Ukraine. And then Ivanovo is a base for Russian military transport aircraft. The Russian Ministry of Defense confirmed Ukraine had targeted Russian airfields across 5 regions on Sunday, calling the drone strikes terrorist attacks. The ministry said strikes were repelled in the Ivanovo, Ryazan, and Amur region, but that several pieces of aircraft caught fire after attacks in the Murmansk and Irkutsk region. It added that the fires had since been extinguished. There were no casualties as a result of the attacks. The ministry continued, adding that some participants in the terrorist attacks have been detained. And then here's the Telegraph, which repeats clearly the line that we're going to hear, which is, "Oh, Trump knew nothing about this." And as I say, I think that Trump really didn't. I'm quite sure, whatever the level of the American involvement, I'm quite sure that Trump was left in the dark. Donald Trump was not told about Ukraine's mass drone attack on Russia's strategic bomber bases. The coordinated strikes orchestrated by Ukraine's security services targeted 4 airfields deep inside Russia, in what could be the most damaging drone attacks of the 3-year war. Operation Web allegedly hit more than 40 strategic bombers. It took 18 months to secure. And then, however, the US president was not notified in advance of the attack. And then the same thing, Ukraine wiped out 1/3 of Russia's strategic bombers. These are wild statements. Wiped them out, they didn't wipe anything else. I mean, they may have hit them, but that doesn't mean they were wiped out. I mean, Ukraine Security Service, they wiped out 34% of Russia's strategic missile carriers. In a post on Telegram, the SBU wrote, $7 billion, that's the estimated cost of the enemy's strategic aviation. 34% of strategic cruise missile carriers of the main airfields were hit. Were hit, and then before you're saying they wiped them out, and so on. And then still the Telegraph, inside Ukraine's Operation Spiderweb, the operation to destroy Russia's strategic bombers at 4 Russian air bases first involved Ukraine transporting small kamikaze first-person view drones to Russia. So they had to get the drones to Russia. They needed the trucks. They needed the sheds on the trucks. The drones, which were laden with explosives, were allegedly then hidden under the roofs of containers inside trucks. Once the trucks were positioned close to their targets, where the drones were being raised. The lids of the containers were open remotely, and the drones flew on to strike the bombers. And now we've had the Russian retaliation. And here we have Russian military strikes, Ukrainian drone launch site, over 30 long-range kamikaze unmanned aerial vehicles were destroyed in the attack, the Russian Defense Ministry said. And it said Moscow has successfully hit a Ukrainian long-range drone launch site in Ukraine's northeastern Kharkov region. And then it also published a video of the strikes. This is the Russian Defense Ministry. It said the strike destroyed all of the launch pads, along with some 30 long-range kamikaze drones and 8 military vehicles. And then a short video shows a powerful blast rocking an area near the airfield where some installations were located. According to the ministry, a Russian Iskander-M ballistic missile system was used in the strike. Now, of course, when you read this, and assuming it's true, you wonder, okay, you mean you've been fighting this war for more than 3 years in the Kharkov region, and it's taken you all this time to take out a Ukrainian long-range drone launch site in the northeastern Kharkov region. And they said the strike destroyed all of the launch pads, along with some 30 long-range kamikaze drones and 8 military vehicles. So you wonder, well, what took you so long? Why hasn't this already been done? I mean, so you obviously knew all about it. You could have destroyed it, and you haven't done it. So, you know, I mean, Russia has now been in the Kharkov region for more than 3 years. You would have thought that you would have destroyed a drone launch site, particularly as Ukraine has been waging this drone war against Russia for quite some time. So one has to wonder what the strategy is here. I mean, if you just destroy these things in retaliation for what was basically a humiliation today, rather than destroy them as part of your war fighting and winning strategy. So that is definitely a question that needs to be raised, and we've raised it many times before and never really received a satisfactory answer. So where are we now? As I said, this is clearly a humiliation for Russia, because it's obviously an intelligence failure, a military strategic failure. Now, how much damage it caused, we don't as yet know. It may be minimal, maybe more serious. I think it's much more of a psychological thing. But you know, as the situation as we were going into Istanbul has changed, because all of the expectation and all of the media reporting, especially all of the alt media reporting, was that Russia has the upper hand, Russia's winning, Ukraine is in desperate straits, Ukraine is really, you know, if not on its last legs, it's approaching its last legs, and therefore Russia would be in the position to dictate terms and be in a position to demand accession from Ukraine to its terms. This puts a different spin on it, because now it seems like, well, Ukraine has quite a bit of capability still, and presumably it's can conduct more of these strikes, more of these somewhat painful, embarrassing strikes. And so suddenly it seems as if Russia would have an incentive really to come to a settlement, rather than as the expectation was as we were going into Istanbul, that Russia would just simply bang its fist on the table and say, well, we can go on fighting. You know, we're much stronger than you are. We're in much better condition than you are in. We can just go on and take one oblast after another. You know, you don't like losing 4 oblasts, we can take 8 oblasts. That's that position. So now, you know, Russia has shown some vulnerability. So it puts a different hue to the talks in Istanbul tomorrow. So, you know, this is undoubtedly a coup for Ukraine, something we should have expected, which unfortunately people didn't. We'll see what impact this has on the negotiations on Monday, June the 2nd. Anyway, we will obviously have much more to say about the this drone attack.
A few hours ago, reputable Russian military experts, citing their sources in the Russian military department, said the Russian army would adopt the unique nuclear-powered, nuclear-armed cruise missile 9M730 Burevestnik in early 2027. According to authoritative military expert Dmitry Kornev, the successful test launch of the nuclear-powered cruise missile Burevestnik in 2023 was so successful and impressive that the Russian High Military Command decided to accelerate the adoption of this unique missile, which is capable of fundamentally changing the balance of power in the whole world for the next decades. Moreover, this military expert confirmed that by 2027, Russia will conduct at least one more test of the Burevestnik, utilizing the latest technologies that will significantly enhance the tactical and technical characteristics of this unique nuclear-powered cruise missile. Meanwhile, insiders in Washington confirmed that the Pentagon was shocked by the fact that in 2027, the Russian army will receive the nuclear-powered cruise missile Burevestnik. Reports indicate that currently, Americans are very nervous. To a certain extent, this is due to the fact that since the 1960s of the last century, the United States has carried out titanic work to create its own nuclear-powered, nuclear-armed cruise missile, capable of being in the air for months, and even years. However, regrettably for Washington, all of these tests proved to be unsuccessful, resulting in the need for the United States to abandon this idea. According to many experts, the United States is jealous of Russia's achievements in developing this unique cruise missile. Experts claim that Washington is in a state of shock from the realization that it was Russian engineers who managed to solve all the technical problems when creating a nuclear-powered cruise missile. Furthermore, the United States recognizes that this unique cruise missile can secure Russia's complete dominance in the international arena for the coming decades. Against this backdrop, the West, led by the United States, continues to demand a ban on this missile. According to Western leaders, Burevestnik allegedly threatens not only Russia's enemies, but also the whole of humanity. Russian experimental nuclear-powered, nuclear-armed cruise missile Burevestnik, which took designation in the West as Skyfall, continues instilling terror in the Western military. The United States continues its efforts to ban this missile. More and more experts around the world are convinced every day that the United States dreams that Russia will abandon the development of its latest missile weapons. My friends, let me remind you that recently, American warships have repeatedly staged provocations near Russian borders. Such maneuvers are often accompanied by rather arrogant and brazen comments from the American military, declaring the legality of their actions. According to experts, Russia grew tired of these incidents, and Moscow gave a decisive answer to the Pentagon. There was a widely publicized incident when the U.S. Navy destroyer John McCain burst into Russian waters in Peter the Great Gulf and nearly provoked a serious military conflict. For a long time, the Americans didn't react to Russian warnings, and only the threat of a direct collision with the Russian Navy stopped them. After all these provocations, the Russian Federation launched a counterattack. I noticed that the expert community began to discuss more and more information about the development of the Russian intercontinental cruise missile Burevestnik. It is reported that the Russian military is preparing for the next tests of this promising combat system. Experts suggested that the Russian military doesn't specifically hide the new tests of the Burevestnik missile in order to exert a psychological impact on its Western opponents. Over the past several years, Russia has been developing an extremely unusual and complex combat system called Burevestnik, which is known in the West as Skyfall. According to experts, the novelty differs from other cruise missiles by the presence of a miniature nuclear reactor, due to which it will be able to fly almost unlimited distances at very high speeds. Russian military experts argue that the Burevestnik missile cannot be intercepted and is extremely difficult to track. This missile constantly changes its flight path, and like a ghost, can appear literally out of nowhere. The missile uses a nuclear power plant and therefore has a virtually unlimited range. Adopting a Burevestnik missile will have serious global consequences. The fact is that the productivity of these missiles is extremely high, plus there is no effective defense against them in the world. These missiles will become a powerful trump card for Russia in the world military and political environment. Moreover, the Chinese experts of the edition Sohu say that the United States admits that the Burevestnik is indeed a dangerous weapon, and they are afraid of it. In the United States, they dream that Russia will stop the development of its new weapons. Similar calls were made not only by the US military, but also by local analysts, who draw attention to the destructive power of the Burevestnik missile and the inability of the Pentagon to resist it. In this regard, even the news about the development of this weapon has an impressive effect and is a psychological attack on the opponent. In my opinion, Russia will not stop the development of the Burevestnik missile under any pretext. And soon, all shall bear witness to the great power, like no one has ever seen before, that will finally stop endless provocations of the West. I'm absolutely certain that the nuclear-powered cruise missile Burevestnik will finally force the West to abandon the idea of inflicting a tactical and strategic defeat on Russia. I'm absolutely certain that after this unique missile enters service with the Russian army, the West will finally stop provoking Moscow with its destructive actions in post-Soviet countries. Moreover, given the unique characteristics of this cruise missile, it is safe to say that it is Burevestnik that will become the major deterrent to the West. As a result, European and American globalists will not only have to abandon the further expansion of the North Atlantic Alliance, but also begin to behave more cautiously towards Moscow, taking into account all of Russia's national interests.